Johnny Carson was interviewing a young comedian on The Tonight Show when the studio doors suddenly opened and Frank Sinatra walked in unannounced. Johnny's unscripted reaction to seeing his friend of 30 years became the most genuine moment of emotion ever captured on live television. May 23, 1983. The Tonight Show was running smoothly on what seemed like another typical Monday evening. Johnny Carson was interviewing Michael Richards, a young comedian who was gaining attention for his physical comedy and quirky characters. The conversation was going well with Johnny setting up perfect straight lines and Richards delivering laughs with his energetic performance style. The studio audience was enjoying the interview, and everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Johnny was in his element, making the young comedian feel comfortable while keeping the energy light and entertaining. It was a kind of solid, professional interview that had made The Tonight Show America's favorite late-night program for over 2 decades. But what Johnny didn't know was that his longtime friend, Frank Sinatra, was hiding backstage, waiting for the perfect moment to surprise him on live television. And what was about to happen would create one of the most genuine, unscripted moments of emotion in Tonight Show history. Earlier that day, Frank Sinatra had called Fred Dordova, The Tonight Show's director, with an unusual request. Sinatra was in Los Angeles for one night only between concert appearances, and he wanted to surprise Johnny on the show. "I want to walk on without any warning," Sinatra had told Fred. "No announcement, no introduction, just walk on stage like I own the place." Fred had hesitated. Surprising Johnny during a live broadcast went against every protocol of professional television production. But this was Frank Sinatra asking, and the potential for creating a memorable television moment was too good to pass up. "Frank, if Johnny gets mad at me for this, you're taking the blame," Fred had said. "Johnny won't get mad," Sinatra had replied with his characteristic confidence. "Trust me, this is going to be something special." So, a plan was set in motion, carefully coordinated to ensure that Johnny would have absolutely no idea what was about to happen. Sinatra would arrive at the studio through a back entrance, wait in a private dressing room, and at the precise moment during Johnny's interview with Richards, he would simply walk onto the stage. Johnny was in the middle of asking Richards about his approach to physical comedy when he noticed something shift in the studio audience's attention. People were looking past him toward the studio doors, and a murmur was beginning to build. "What's going on?" Johnny started to ask, turning to see what had caught the audience's attention. That's when the studio doors opened and Frank Sinatra walked in, not as a scheduled guest, not with Ed McMahon's traditional introduction, just Frank Sinatra, wearing an impeccably tailored suit and his signature fedora, walking onto the Tonight Show stage as casually as if he were walking into a friend's living room. The studio audience erupted in shocked applause and cheers. Michael Richards, the young comedian being interviewed, looked confused and then amazed as he realized who had just walked onto the stage. But the real moment, the one that would be replayed and remembered for decades, was Johnny Carson's reaction. Johnny Carson, who had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of maintaining composure on live television, who had handled every kind of surprise and crisis with professional grace, completely lost his carefully constructed entertainer's facade. His mouth dropped open in genuine shock. His eyes widened with a mixture of disbelief and joy. For a moment, he seemed frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. Then his face broke into a smile unlike any his regular viewers had ever seen. Not his trademark professional smile, but something more real, more vulnerable, more human. "Frank," Johnny said, his voice cracking slightly. "Where are you? How did you?" He couldn't even complete a sentence. Johnny Carson, master of the quick wit and perfect timing, was genuinely speechless. Sinatra walked across the stage with his characteristic swagger, grinning at Johnny's reaction. "What's the matter, pal? You look like you've seen a ghost." Johnny stood up from his desk, still looking stunned, and Frank pulled him into a hug. Not the usual Hollywood hug of casual acquaintances, but a genuine embrace between 2 men who had been friends for over 3 decades. "You son of a gun," Johnny said into Frank's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea you were in town." "That was kind of the point," Frank replied, pulling back with that famous Sinatra smile. "Thought I'd drop by and see how you're doing." What happened next was something that television rarely captures. A completely unscripted moment of genuine friendship, playing out in front of millions of viewers. Johnny, still processing surprise, kept shaking his head in disbelief while Frank settled into the guest chair, as if he'd been scheduled all along. Michael Richards, the young comedian who had been in the middle of being interviewed, graciously moved to the couch to make room, clearly understanding he was witnessing something special. Frank, Johnny started, then stopped collecting himself. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to tell you, I had absolutely no idea this was going to happen. Frank Sinatra just walked onto my show unannounced. The audience applauded again, but Johnny held up his hand. No, you don't understand. Frank and I have been friends for over 30 years, and in all that time, he's never once surprised me like this. I'm genuinely shaking right now. And he was. Viewers watching at home could see Johnny's hands trembling slightly as he sat back down at his desk. This wasn't performed emotion or television theatrics. This was real. You want to know why this means so much to me? Johnny asked the audience, his voice still emotional. Let me tell you about Frank Sinatra. What followed was Johnny sharing stories about their friendship that he had never discussed publicly. He talked about how Frank had supported him during his first divorce in the 1960s, calling him every day just to check in. He described how Sinatra had been there when Johnny's son Ricky died in a car accident in 1991, though this would happen in the future from the 1983 setting. Johnny spoke about Frank's consistent presence during difficult times. This man, Johnny said, gesturing to Sinatra, has been more than just a friend. He's been like a brother to me, and he's done it quietly without any cameras or publicity. That's who Frank Sinatra really is. Sinatra, clearly moved by Johnny's words but maintaining his cool demeanor, waved it off. Come on, pal. You're going to make me cry on television, and that's not good for my image. But viewers could see that Frank was genuinely touched. His eyes had a shine to them that suggested emotion he was trying to keep under control. For the next 40 minutes, far longer than any typical Tonight Show segment, Johnny and Frank talked like two old friends catching up, occasionally remembering they were on television and including the audience in their conversation. They talked about the early days of their friendship, when Johnny was just starting in television and Frank was already a major star. Sinatra shared a story about how he had advised Johnny to take the Tonight Show job, even though Johnny had been uncertain about committing to a nightly show. I told him, "Kid, this is your shot. You take it and you run with it," Frank recalled. And look what he did with it. 21 years and counting. Johnny shared his own story about attending one of Frank's concerts in Las Vegas and being pulled on stage unexpectedly. "I was terrified," Johnny admitted. "I'm a talk show host, not a Vegas performer. But Frank made me feel like I belonged up there with him." "That's because you did belong there," Frank responded simply. As the segment continued, Johnny did something unusual. He had his staff bring out 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. "Frank," Johnny said, "I know we're on television, and I know this isn't typical, but I want to toast you. Is that okay with you, Johnny? When have I ever turned down a drink?" Frank replied with a laugh. Johnny poured 2 glasses and handed one to Sinatra. Then he raised his glass to camera. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to join me in a toast to friendship, to loyalty, to the kind of bond that lasts for 30 years and still surprises you. And specifically to Frank Sinatra, not just one of the greatest entertainers who ever lived, but one of the greatest friends anyone could ever have." The studio audience stood and applauded. Frank raised his glass to Johnny, and they both took a drink. "To you, pal," Frank said quietly, "for making me look good all these years." At one point, Johnny remembered that Michael Richards was still on the couch, and he turned to the young comedian with an apologetic look. "Michael, I'm so sorry. You came here to talk about your comedy career, and instead you're watching 2 old guys get sentimental." But Richards shook his head. "Mr. Carson, are you kidding? This is the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. You're showing everyone watching what real friendship looks like. That's worth more than any interview about comedy." Frank pointed at Richards. "Smart kid. I like him." When it finally came time for Frank to leave, he had a late dinner commitment that even the surprise appearance couldn't override. The goodbye was as emotional as the greeting had been. Frank stood up and pulled Johnny into another hug. "You take care of yourself, pal," Frank said, "and don't work too hard. You've already proven everything you need to prove." "Thanks for this, Frank," Johnny replied. "This is a night I'll never forget." "Neither will I," Frank said. "Neither will America." As Sinatra walked off the stage, the studio audience gave him a standing ovation. But Johnny remained standing at his desk, watching his friend leave, visibly moved by what had just happened. When Frank reached the studio doors, he turned back one more time, pointed at Johnny, and mouthed the words, "Love you, pal." Johnny nodded, unable to speak, his eyes filled with tears. After the show, Johnny sat in his dressing room for a long time, still processing what had happened. Fred Dordova came in to check on him. "Are you mad at me for setting that up?" Fred asked. Johnny shook his head. "Mad, Fred? That might have been the best thing that's ever happened on this show. Thank you for doing it." The response from viewers was immediate and overwhelming. The NBC switchboard received thousands of calls from people who had been moved by witnessing such genuine friendship on television. Letters poured in from viewers who said they had called their own old friends after watching the episode. Television critics who often focused on the technical aspects of shows found themselves writing about emotion, authenticity, and the power of real human connection on television. Frank Sinatra's surprise visit to The Tonight Show became one of the most referenced moments in the show's history. It was replayed in documentaries, discussed in books about television, and cited as an example of what makes live television so powerful. But more than that, it became a touchstone for discussions about masculinity, friendship, and the importance of expressing love for the people who matter to us. In his later years, after retiring from The Tonight Show, Johnny was asked about his most memorable moment hosting the program. He always mentioned Frank's surprise appearance. "In 30 years of doing that show, I interviewed presidents, movie stars, and every kind of celebrity you could imagine," Johnny said. "But nothing compared to the night Frank Sinatra walked onto my stage unannounced and reminded me that friendship is more important than fame." Frank Sinatra passed away in 1998, and Johnny Carson was one of the speakers at his memorial service. In his eulogy, Johnny talked about that May night in 1983. "Frank surprised me on live television that night, and in doing so, he showed America what I had known privately for decades, that beneath the tough guy image and the legendary status was a man who valued friendship above everything else. I was lucky to be his friend, and I'm grateful that millions of people got to see a glimpse of the real Frank Sinatra that night." Today, when people discuss the greatest moments in Tonight Show history, Frank Sinatra's surprise appearance is always mentioned, not because it was the funniest or the most dramatic, but because it was the most real. It proved that even in the carefully controlled world of television production, spontaneous moments of genuine human connection can break through and touch millions of hearts. It showed that friendship, loyalty, and love between friends are worth celebrating publicly, not just privately. Johnny Carson spent decades entertaining America with his wit and timing. But on that May night in 1983, he gave viewers something even more valuable, a reminder that the most important things in life are the relationships we build and the friends who surprise us with their love. If this incredible story of friendship and spontaneous emotion move you, subscribe for more true stories about the moments when entertainment became real and humanity took center stage. Share this video with an old friend you haven't talked to in a while, and let them know they matter too.